There is a quiet prison that millions of people live in every single day. It has no walls, no guards, no chains, and yet it controls how people speak, how they behave, how they live their lives. This prison is built from something surprisingly fragile: other people's opinions. Think about how often this invisible force shapes our decisions. A moment when you stay silent even though you wanted to speak. A path you follow not because it excites you, but because it seems respectable. A dream you quietly postpone because you are unsure how others might react. None of these moments feel dramatic. They seem small, almost insignificant, but over time they accumulate, and slowly, without realizing it, many people begin designing their lives around the expectations of others. The strange part is this: most of the opinions that influence us come from people who have never truly examined their own lives. People repeating ideas they inherited from someone else. People reacting quickly without ever asking deeper questions. Yet those opinions can still influence our choices, our confidence, even our identity. A young student may abandon a passion because someone once told them it was unrealistic. An artist may hide their work because they fear criticism. Someone may remain silent for years because disagreement feels uncomfortable. Little by little, life becomes smaller, not because the person lacked potential, but because they feared judgment. And this leads to a question that philosophers have asked for centuries. Why do we give so much power to opinions that are often careless, incomplete, and sometimes completely wrong? Stoic philosophy offers a powerful answer, but to understand that answer, we must first understand something deeper about human nature. Why approval feels so important in the first place. And once we see that clearly, the grip of other people's opinions begins to loosen. Which brings us to the next idea: why human beings care so deeply about approval. To understand why other people's opinions affect us so deeply, we must look at something rooted deep inside human nature. For most of human history, survival depended on belonging to a group. Thousands of years ago, being accepted by the tribe meant protection. Food could be shared, danger could be faced together. But being rejected was something entirely different. Rejection often meant isolation. And isolation in ancient times could mean death. Because of this, the human brain developed a powerful sensitivity to social approval. Acceptance felt safe. Disapproval felt threatening. Even today, long after the world has changed, that instinct still lives inside us. A critical comment can feel strangely heavy. A disapproving look can linger in the mind far longer than it should. And slowly, often without noticing, people begin adjusting their behavior to avoid that discomfort. They soften their opinions. They hide their disagreements. They shape their choices around what seems acceptable, not what feels true. This is how approval quietly begins to guide a life. Consider something that happens to many people. A young student feels drawn toward art, writing, or music. But someone tells them those paths are unrealistic. Choose something practical. Choose something respectable. So they do. They follow a path that looks impressive from the outside. Years later, they may succeed. They may earn money. They may gain recognition. And yet a quiet question sometimes appears. Was this truly my path? Or was it simply the safest one? This is how the desire for approval quietly reshapes direction. Not through force, but through subtle pressure. And over time, that pressure can become surprisingly powerful. Because the more someone depends on approval, the more fragile their confidence becomes. Praise lifts them, criticism shakes them, and their sense of direction begins to move with the crowd. But Stoic philosophy invites us to see something important. Approval is temporary. Character is permanent. The crowd may celebrate you today and misunderstand you tomorrow. But the person you become through your choice stays with you for the rest of your life. And once you begin to see this clearly, another realization slowly appears. The opinions we fear so much may not be as reliable as we once believed. Which brings us to the next idea, the surprising problem with public opinion itself. When we begin looking closely at public opinion, something surprising becomes clear. Most opinions are formed quickly, often with very little information, sometimes with almost no understanding at all. People react to fragments. A short moment, a single comment, a partial impression. And from that small glimpse, a judgment is formed. This does not mean people are cruel. It simply means they are human. Human beings naturally fill gaps in information with assumptions. But the result is the same. Many opinions that feel powerful in the momentary actually built on very fragile foundations. This is why crowds can change their views so quickly. The same crowd that praises someone today may criticize them tomorrow. Public opinion moves like weather, sometimes calm, sometimes stormy, always changing. History offers many examples of this pattern. Vincent van Gogh sold almost none of his paintings while alive. During his lifetime, his work was largely ignored. Today, those same paintings are considered priceless. The scientist Galileo was once criticized for suggesting that the Earth moves around the sun. Yet today that idea is part of basic science. Even many philosophers whose ideas shaped civilization were misunderstood in their own time. What this reveals is something important. The crowd is not always wrong, but the crowd is rarely patient, and wisdom requires patience. Because new ideas often feel uncomfortable at first. They challenge what people are used to believing, and discomfort easily turns into criticism, which leads to a powerful realization. The crowd reacts quickly, but truth reveals itself slowly. When someone builds their life around public approval, they unknowingly tie their piece of mint to something unstable. A system of judgment that changes constantly. A system where the loudest voice say, not always the wisest ones. And once we begin to see this clearly, another question naturally appears. If public opinion is so unstable, Why do we treat reputation as something so important? To answer that question, we must turn to an idea that philosophers explored long before the modern world existed. An idea that helps explain what truly creates happiness in a human life. This idea was explored deeply by the Greek philosopher Aristotle, and it brings us to the next part of the story. But before we go further, pause for a moment and consider something uncomfortable. How many decisions in your life have been influenced, not by what truly felt right to you, but by what you believed others would approve of? The career you chose, the opinion you kept quiet, the dream you postponed, not because it lacked meaning, but because someone else might not understand it. This quiet influence is far more powerful than most people realize, and yet the strange thing is this. Many of the opinions we organize our lives around come from people who have never truly examined life themselves, which raises a deeper question. Why do we give so much power to judgments that are often uncertain? Long before modern society, the Greek philosopher Aristotle explored this question. He asked something remarkably simple. What truly makes a human life good? After years of reflection, he divided the blessings of life into 3 categories. The first is what a person is, their character, their intelligence, their temperament, their way of thinking. The second is what a person has, their possessions, their resources, their material comfort. And the third is how a person appears in the eyes of others, their reputation, their popularity, their status at first glance. Many people assume this third category must be extremely important. After all, reputation feels powerful, recognition feels meaningful, public admiration feels rewarding. But centuries later, the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer examined Aristotle's idea more closely, and he reached a striking conclusion. Among these 3 categories, the most important for human happiness is the first one. What a person is, their inner life, their character, their mindset. Because wherever you go, you carry yourself with you. Your way of thinking shapes your experience. Your emotional stability shapes your peace. Your perspective shapes the meaning you find in life. The second category, what you have, can certainly make life easier. Money may create comfort. Possessions may create convenience. But beyond basic needs, their power to create happiness begins to fade. A person with modest resource may feel deeply content, while someone surrounded by luxury may still feel restless. But the third category is where things become dangerous, because reputation exists entirely in the minds of other people, and the minds of other people change constantly, which leads to a realization many people overlook. The most fragile foundation for happiness is the opinion of the crowd. And once we see this clearly, another question naturally appears. If reputation is so unstable, why do we spend so much energy trying to control how others see us? To understand that, we must look more closely at the strange nature of reputation itself. And that brings us to the next part of the story. If reputation depends entirely on the minds of other people, then something important becomes clear. Reputation is one of the most unstable things a person can build their life around. Because the minds of other people change constantly, public opinion shifts quickly, sometimes because of new information, sometimes because of misunderstanding, and sometimes simply because attention moves elsewhere. The same crowd that praises someone today may criticize them tomorrow, not because the person changed, but because perception changed. This is why philosophers throughout history have warned against tying one's happiness to reputation. Because reputation lives outside your control. It exists in thousands of separate minds, each one shaped by different experiences, biases, and assumptions. Trying to manage all of those opinions is impossible, and yet many people still try. They adjust their behavior, they soften their beliefs, they reshape their identity in order to maintain approval. But this effort rarely leads to peace. Instead, it creates a constant tension, a quiet anxiety about how one is being perceived. There is a simple story that illustrates this perfectly. A young painter once displayed one of his works in a busy town square. Next to the painting, he placed a small sign. "If you see a mistake, please mark it." The next day he returned. The painting was covered in marks. Nearly every part of the canvas had been criticized. At first, the painter felt discouraged. But instead of giving up, he tried a second experiment. He displayed the same painting again. But this time the sign said something different. "If you see a mistake, please correct it." When he returned the next day, the painting was untouched. Not a single correction had been made. People had been eager to criticize, but far less eager to understand. And this reveals something important about human judgment. Criticism is easy. Understanding requires effort, which means the loudest opinions are not always the most thoughtful ones. And once we begin to see this pattern, another realization slowly emerges. If opinions are so quick to criticize and so slow to understand, perhaps they deserve far less power over our lives than we usually give them. And this realization leads you to one of the most important ideas in Stoic philosophy: how to live freely in a world full of opinions. When we begin to understand how fragile public opinion can be, another pattern becomes visible. Many people slowly fall into something we might call the approval trap. At first, the desire for approval seems harmless. Praise feels good. Recognition feels validating. It creates a sense that we are doing something right. But over time, something subtle begins to change. Instead of acting according to our principles, we begin acting according to reactions. We pay close attention to how others respond. If people approve, we feel confident. If people criticize, we feel uncertain. Slowly, our emotional balance begins to depend on something outside our control. And this creates a fragile kind of confidence. A confidence that rises and falls with the opinions of others. The Stoic philosophers saw this clearly. They understood that when a person's sense of worth depends on approval, their peace of mind becomes unstable. Because approval is unpredictable. It shifts with trends, it shifts with emotions, it shifts with the changing attitudes of the crowd. But Stoicism offers a different path. Instead of trying to control public opinion, the Stoics focused on something far more stable: character, integrity, clarity of judgment. Marcus Aurelius wrote something remarkably simple. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Other people's opinions belong to the category of outside events. They cannot be controlled, they cannot be predicted, and they often say more about the person expressing them than about the person being judged. When someone truly understands this, something important changes. Praise becomes less intoxicating. Criticism becomes less frightening. The mind becomes steadier. Instead of chasing approval, a person begins strengthening their character. Instead of reacting to the crowd, they begin listening to their own judgment. And this quiet shift creates something powerful. A kind of freedom that many people spend their entire lives searching for. Because once approval is no longer necessary for peace of mind, something remarkable happens. You begin to live more honestly. And honesty has a quiet strength that approval can never provide. This realization leads us to the final Stoic insight: how to remain calm in a world full of opinions. When a person truly understands that other people's opinions are unstable, something quiet begins to change inside them. They stop reacting to every judgment. They stop measuring their worth through the eyes of strangers. Instead, they begin observing opinions without being controlled by them. This is the shift the Stoic philosophers described: not indifference toward people, but freedom from unnecessary dependence on their approval. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that every opinion is simply a perspective, a passing thought in someone else's mind, and thoughts pass quickly. What feels important today may be forgotten tomorrow. Yet many people spend enormous energy trying to control those passing thoughts. They try to appear impressive. They try to avoid criticism. They try to shape an image that everyone will admire. But the Stoics recognized something deeper. This effort is endless, because no matter how carefully you manage your reputation, someone will misunderstand you. Someone will disagree with you. Someone will judge you unfairly, not because you failed, but because human perception is imperfect. Once this becomes clear, a different way of living becomes possible. Instead of managing impressions, a person can focus on something far more meaningful, strengthening their character, improving their judgment, living according to principles they respect. When that happens, approval becomes optional, and criticism becomes manageable. Because the center of your life no longer sits in the minds of other people. It sits within your own values. And this realization leads to one of the most powerful truths in Stoic philosophy. The moment you stop needing approval, you become impossible to control. Your choices become clearer. Your confidence becomes steadier. Your direction becomes your own. And in a world constantly shaped by opinions, this quiet independence becomes a rare form of strength, which brings us to the final realization: what it truly means to live beyond the opinions of the crowd. By now, something important should feel clearer. Most opinions are temporary, most judgments are incomplete, and much of the criticism people fear is simply another person's interpretation, a very small part of reality. Yet many people spend enormous energy trying to manage those opinions. They adjust their behavior, they soften their voice, they reshape their identity, all in an attempt to avoid disapproval. But Stoic philosophy offers a different way of seeing things. Not a life without criticism, but a life that is no longer controlled by it. Marcus Aurelius once wrote something that feels surprisingly modern. The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject. And yet many people allow those opinions to determine their confidence, their direction, even their sense of worth. But once you see the fragile nature of public opinion, its power begins to fade. You begin to understand something simple. People will always have opinions. Some will admire you. Some will misunderstand you. Some will criticize you without ever fully knowing your story. And none of those reactions are entirely within your control. But something else is: your character, your decisions, your values. These belong entirely to you, and they shape your life far more than the approval of the crowd ever could. Because in the end, the crowd decides what it likes, but character decides who you become. And once you begin living from that place, something inside you becomes quieter. The constant noise of approval and criticism no longer dominates your mind. You stop wondering how every decision will appear in the eyes of others. You stop measuring your worth through passing judgments. Instead, a deeper clarity begins to emerge. A calm understanding that your life does not belong to the crowd. It belongs to the choices you make, the values you follow, and the character you build over time. And when that realization settles in, other people's opinions no longer feel like chains. They simply become background noise in a life that finally belongs to you. If this reflection resonated with you, you may find many more ideas like this here on Stoic Havenway. This channel explores timeless wisdom that helps us navigate the modern world with clarity, strength, and inner freedom. If you enjoy reflections like these, consider subscribing and joining this growing community. Thank you for spending this time here.